Hello music friends, Marcel Haster here and welcome to liveprog. And yes, it is finally time. I finally can bring you the review of this album, Capacitor, the brand new Cosmograf album. As you can see, there's a lot of reflection in it and the artwork is really cool. Now this album comes, to my impression, hot on the heels of The Man Left in Space. Although it turns out that The Man Left in Space was released already a year ago, but that album has really become one of my most loved albums in my collection. I am so impressed by that album, I love it so much. So when Capacitor was announced, I was a bit worried. I mean, you really love an album and then the next one comes up and then you have that worry. Will it be better? Will I like it more? Will I not like The Man Left in Space anymore? So I was a bit hesitant to listen to it, but at a certain point I decided, no, I gotta listen to the album someday. So I took the plunge and I listened to it, and I started listening to it and I couldn't stop listening to it because once again Mr. Robin Armstrong, the man behind Cosmograf, has created a fantastic album with, as you can see, a very beautiful artwork.
Hello and welcome to my small and visual studio. This is Robin Armstrong from Cosmograf. You are watching liveprog.com.
So what happens to the energy in our bodies when we die?
The artwork, as usual, I mean the last albums were done by Graham Bell from Planet Twig. He did the artwork again and I really love it very much. As you can see, it's really beautiful. And it also kind of gives you an idea of the mood of the album, because as you know, or may not know, Robin Armstrong is a real storyteller. Every album he releases is a concept album, is a story he wants to tell. And well, if I go back to the last two albums that I have reviewed, When Age is Done is Duty from 2011, that was a story about, well, human life basically, and going towards the end of life. And then you had The Man Left in Space, which was of course a more science fiction kind of story. I think of 2001 A Space Odyssey. And now we have Capacitor, and as you can see you have that figure hanging on the tree. That gives you this gloomy idea. Well, you have this one here, you know, all this really amazing artwork by Mr. Graham Bell. I can't stress that enough because he's really a fantastic artist. And of course a nice picture from Mr. Robin Armstrong. So a fantastic album, and once again a story, a supernatural story in this case. I mean, it is called Capacitor and that gives you the idea of physics, and it is touching on scientific things, but it mostly touches on the idea what happens to our human spirit. The first track on the album, The Spirit Capture, is basically the introduction towards the album, what you get there, and there are a couple of interesting statements that he makes there. For example, the weight of a man's soul is 21 grams. Behind every man stands 30 ghosts. For that is the ratio for that the dead outnumber the living. You know, those kind of ideas are pitched here in this album, and he turns it into an album that once you start listening to it, you keep on listening to it. You get really hooked up to it, you know, like you really are reading a fascinating book or watching an exciting movie. That is the idea that Robin brings in his music, that he really captures you and he really entertains you throughout the entire album and brings you an amazing album again, because as far as songwriting goes, I think he's fantastic, but I hear growth in the way that he did this album. And one particular thing that I love about this album are the vocals. I mean, if I look back at The Man Left in Space, there were a lot of guest musicians in it doing their parts. Now, of course, I like that very much, and there were a couple of amazing musicians that really did some beautiful parts in it. But on Capacitor, there are only a few guests, and Robin Armstrong does the majority of the instruments and he does all the vocals. And I gotta say, vocal-wise, I must say I am impressed by what an amazing singer he is. I really hear that he has become a better singer. On the previous album he had a couple of really amazing guitar players as guests that did some great solos in it. But on this album there are some really amazing solos done by Robin Armstrong himself, and I was like, wow, awesome, that really is fantastic. There's only one additional guitar player on this album in the last track, and that is Matt Stevens. Now I'm really happy that he's a part of this album again, because Matt Stevens is a fantastic guitar player, great guy. And again, on that last track, Stuck in the Woods, he does a fantastic job when it comes to guitars. Now I already gave you away something of the last track, but let's go back to the beginning of the album. As I mentioned, the first track, The Spirit Capture, is the kind of the introduction to the album, and there we have the first guest on the bass. There are a few people doing the bass. Robin Armstrong does bass on a couple of tracks himself, but I did hear a difference between when he does it and when he has his guests do it. For some reason, you know, he included a few bass players that really put a mark on the music, and I think that is good. If you have a guest musician in it, let him stand out so you can really hear the influence and the impact he has on the album. And for the first few tracks he managed to secure the services of Colin Edwin, of course known from Porcupine Tree, and already in that first track the bass really stands out. I liked it very much. It's a bit of a heavier song, some heavy guitars in it, and there he kind of introduces the story, and from there on out we really move into the different tales that he tells in this album. All tales depicting well, the human spirit, but also a bit of a ghost story in it. I mean, when you listen to that album and you listen to the atmospheres he creates, and especially you know, if you go into the ghost story idea, you can do a lot of cool things with the atmospheres, and he does that very much. There are a couple of really beautiful songs in it. Something I love, I mentioned the vocal part. The vocal part especially stands out for me in the second track, The Fear Created. I really love the way that Robin Armstrong sings in that track. Another part that I absolutely love very much is in the Reaper song. That's the third track on the album. Here we have Steve Dunn on the bass. But it's a really amazing song. We listened to it, but I love the part that he does at the end. There you have someone, a sort of an announcer, saying, please mind the gap between life and death. Mind the gap, mind the gap. That is what you hear when you take the tube in England. You know, you hear someone saying mind the gap, make sure you don't fall in there. And then he used that part into his music, and I like that. It's just a little touch, but I like it very much, and that is something that makes this album really special, you know, those little things that he added towards already fantastic songs. The next track, track number 4, The Drover, also has some really amazing things in it. We have another guest musician here, Mr. Andy Tillison from The Tangent. He's doing a really amazing organ solo on that track, and you know, and accompanied with the acoustic guitar of Robin Armstrong, it just gives that really amazing feeling, and that is something that is, you know, it's pure enjoyment to listen to. I mean, every song is like, wow, wow, every song gets better.
Flicker of the light, knock once if you're there. A message from a Vera, it's got something to share.
But I have to be honest, there was one song that absolutely stood out for me. That is the longest track on the album. It's well over 9 minutes, and that is the track White Car. And I was listening to that album, it's like, oh my god, it keeps on going. What I particularly like is the beginning of that song. The beginning of that song gives me the idea what you get when you listen to a solo album of Roger Waters, because Roger Waters is also a master of creating a certain atmosphere. And what happens at the beginning of White Car is that you have that piano chord going on, and then in the background you have some voices, and this is more a song about ghosts. It's a bit of a sad song actually, because it deals with a girl that is hit by a car and dies, and at the beginning you have sort of a medium trying to contact the ghost of that girl. And but the really amazing atmosphere that's created there is really beautiful. And then you have that guitar solo by Robin Armstrong. It's like, wow, that is really cool, that is really fantastic. I didn't know he was that good. And then you have, in the middle, you have this really heavy part. It's kind of unexpected. And then afterwards we have that another amazing guitar solo again. And it's like, wow, I love that song very much. White Car is definitely one of my favorite tracks on this album, although I basically love the entire album. I mean, it is really a fantastic album. And the atmosphere, that Waters kind of atmosphere, keeps on moving towards the rest of the album, because also The Ghost Gets Made, which is the second longest track on the album, which is well over 8 minutes, also starts off with that kind of atmosphere. Here again we have a guest performance, but this time on the vocals. We have the voice of the surfer, Steve Main, who really does a nice part in it that's really kind of catchy when you listen to it. By the way, on the previous track, White Car, there's also a sort of guest vocalist doing the voice of that medium, Catherine Thompson. He also does a very nice part in there. In that track, The Ghost Get Made, you know, what you had in White Car kind of continues there, because you have more great guitar work in it, more amazing vocals in it. Add to that the vocals of, as I mentioned, Steve Main, and you get a really fantastic song that really keeps you listening. And the nice part is, and that you happen in several parts of this album, is that, as I said, he's telling a story, and sometimes he's just changing the tone a little bit, you know, going quiet a little bit and then going up again to really keep you listening. And when you tell a story to someone, or when you read a story to someone, and you start to, you know, speak a bit slower and use some acoustic instruments, for example, the effect is people coming a little bit closer to listen, you know, to want to hear it well. And that is the effect that I find in this album as well. And I think that is fantastic in the way he does that. And that shows that Robin Armstrong is a really phenomenal musician, creating amazing songs, amazing stories, and knowing to bring them as well. I mean, as it shows here, he's a great multi-instrumentalist, playing guitars, keyboards, bass, synths, doing the vocals. Well, we have that last track, Stuck in the Woods. There's another bass player there, a guy I also very much love and respect, Nick Beggs. He also does a bass part there, and when you listen to that track, you listen to, you know, the way the guitar and the bass play in that song, that is really fantastic. And then there is one person I didn't mention yet. I decided to wait for the last to mention him, Nick DeVirgilio. He is the drummer on the entire album, and I gotta say, when I was listening to the album, I was really enjoying his drumming. I think he's a fantastic drummer. I have heard him on a lot of other albums as well. Also, for example, on Big Big Train there, he also really stood out, but also here on this album, he really stands out in the way he plays, and it all feels like an amazing, beautiful unity of music. I say once again, you know, if you look at the album, it is fantastic artwork, it is really amazing music, fantastic musicians. I like it that there are less musicians in it. I mean, this is really a Robin Armstrong album. He does a lot more on this album than, for example, on The Man Left in Space. And I really respect that for him, because he shows that he is a fantastic composer and a fantastic performer. There has been a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see Cosmograf live. It has been passed already at the Celebrate Point 3 festival. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there, but those who were there have seen the magic of Cosmograf live on stage, and I would give my right arm to see that someday again. I don't know if that will ever happen, but at least we have the album, and I say, get this album, Cosmograf Capacitor, because I say this is a must-have album. This is so incredibly beautiful. I'm not gonna say that I find this more beautiful or less beautiful than The Man Left in Space, because I'm not gonna make a choice between them. I love both albums equally, and once again, you know, Robin Armstrong has got a masterpiece when it comes to progressive rock, and well, to really making an enjoyable album. Thank you very much, Robin Armstrong, for this beautiful album, Capacitor. Make sure you get a copy. So I didn't say it, did I say it? I can't remember. A live prog must have. Make sure you get this one, Capacitor by Robin Armstrong by Cosmograf. Wow. Well, that's it for me. Now, as you know, leave comments on my YouTube channel. Let me know what you think of this album, because I'm also curious about that, you know. I mean, I'm rambling on about this album. I'm really enthusiastic about it. I'm curious, what do you think of this album? And you know, how do you see it compared to The Man Left in Space, or maybe even to When Age Has Done Its Duty? Let me know. Thank you for watching, and I hope you will see me at a new review.